Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Masters of Seduction, Volume 2. By Lara Adrian, Donna Grant, Laura Wright, and Alexandra Ivy. Narrated by Arika Rapson. Priceless, House of Ebarron, by Lara Adrian. Chapter 1. Sorin, master of the Incubus House of Ebarron, leaned back in the divan of his private office as warm, eager hands worked his silk tie loose, then began to unfasten the buttons of his crisp white shirt. Another pair of hands slid over his thighs and groin, zeroing in with fevered enthusiasm on the erection that strained against the fabric of his expensive black suit. Behind him stood a third female, whose fingers played in his wavy golden hair as she leaned over him, her naked breasts bobbing above his upturned face like fruit, ripe for the plucking. He let out a deep sigh, settling into the effortless pleasure that the captain of Eberron's watchmen had procured for him for the evening. Sorin had to admit, Milo had fine taste in women. The trio of human females his personal bodyguard had sent up to the penthouse from Eberron's elite casino downstairs were beautiful, seductive, and clearly intent on fulfilling Sorin's every wicked desire. His body responded instantly as they began to undress him. Already his cock was rock hard, rampant behind his zipper. Lust swamped his acute demon senses, from both his own carnal need and that of the three lovely women vying for his favor. Sex was a powerful drug for any red-blooded male, but especially for one born of the incubi race. They lived for sex, would die without it, in fact. Sorin and every incubus demon like him fed on the energy of their partner's sexual release for sustenance, for life itself. But they fucked for the pure, debauched pleasure of it. Yet, the master of Ebarron could not have been more bored. As enticing and arousing as his companions were, they were just three more nameless faces in a sea of women eager to land in the billionaire casino owner's bed. Like the rest of the mortal world, the females had no idea Sorin's wealth was the least remarkable thing about him. As for his interest in them, Sorin would forget these three the moment they finished with him and left the room. Hell, they were all but forgotten by him now, even with their hands and mouths doing their best to please him. 100 distractions tugged at his attention. Matters concerning the family business and his role as the head of venerable Ebarron House. A role that had also come with an unending awareness of his responsibility for the family's treasury, an obscene fortune in artifacts, arcana, and priceless trinkets, which had been wagered and won, bought or collected by the males of his line over thousands of years. Like the griffin that was the Ebarron sigil, Sorin's family was fiercely proud of their hoard, and famously protective of it as well. Sorin's thoughts snagged on other issues that weighed on him now, too, not the least of which being the persistent unrest and rumors pertaining to the highest seat of power in all of the incubi realm. The obsidian throne was the only thing standing between the gates of heaven and hell. The truce struck between the incubi and the angels, overseen by a council of Nephilim priestesses known as the Three, had forever been a fragile thing. Whispers of ineffectiveness concerning the current sovereign on the throne were hardly new, but reports coming out of the incubi houses of Gravori, Romarak, Vipra, and Xanth in recent weeks indicated corruption and collusion of the worst kind. Bloody damned hell. If boredom with his lovely but forgettable companions wasn't enough to kill his urge to fuck and feed before he'd even gotten started, visions of war between the incubi and the angels certainly was. He couldn't have been more relieved when a knock sounded on the office door. "Enter," he commanded to his watchman posted on the other side. Milo opened the heavy panel, the dark-haired incubus's expression sober.
"Pardon the interruption, sir. We have a situation in the casino."
It was all the reason Sorin needed to extract himself from the three women draped over him. Immodest as any demon, he stood up, began tucking himself back in, zipping and buttoning his disheveled clothing.
"What kind of situation?"
Sorin crossed the room to meet his captain at the door. Christ, could the seasoned watchman's face look any more uncomfortable?
"What the fuck is going on down there?"
Milo cleared his throat, kept his voice low enough for Sorin's ears only.
"Corda Marakel just walked into the casino."
Sorin's answering curse was dark and vivid. The male from another incubus house, and not a master like Sorin, but one of several lower-ranking cousins of Marakel's master, the very incubus who now sat on the obsidian throne. Sorin had once considered Corda Marakel a friend, but now his hackles rose at the mere mention of his name.
"Where is this son of a bitch?"
"The roulette room, sir."
"Alone?"
The watchman shook his head.
"No, he's with a female companion, a Nephilim."
Sorin's anger flared, spiking toward outrage.
"You don't mean he's come back here with—"
"No, not her." Milo's quick reply spared Sorin from uttering the faithless bitch's name. Although it had been 5 years, the betrayal by his former friend, with the woman Sorin might have taken as his mate one day, still sat on his tongue like acid. Not that he'd ever take Greta back. After learning she'd allowed Corda to seduce her, Sorin had raged more at his own stupidity for letting the Nephilim into his life than he had out of any kind of emotional pain that she was gone. She'd made a fool of him, squandered his trust, and he gave no one the chance to do it twice. As for Corda Marakel, friendship across house lines was a sometimes tenuous thing in the incubi realm, but especially when one of those houses was that of the current sovereign. Not to say there weren't a few honorable males among the Marakels, but treachery seemed to run deep in that bunch of demons. The same could be said of their arrogance. If Corda thought he could walk back onto Sorin's turf with impunity, he could think again.
"Who's the female with him?"
"Never seen her before, sir."
"You're certain?"
"Positive." A smirk tugged at the corners of Milo's mouth. "She's not the kind of woman a man is likely to forget."
"Show me."
Irritated now, and not a little curious, Sorin gestured to the sulking playthings left behind in his office.
"Have one of your men escort the ladies out after they've dressed and collected their things."
Milo gave him a nod.
"Consider it done."
The captain of the watchmen made the call, while Sorin and he strode the length of the lavish corridor toward the penthouse elevator. They stepped into the glass lift and descended through the heart of the elegant Ebarron building, toward the casino 12 floors down at ground level. Built into the side of a mountain nestled deep in the Carpathians of Romania, Eberron's casino and family fortress was exclusive in the extreme. Incubus magic protected the place better than any amount of security, rendering it impossible to find on any map or GPS coordinates. Even if outsiders did learn the precise location of the stronghold, unless they could teleport, the terrain itself would keep them away. As such, the casino catered mostly to incubi and other less-ranking demon kind, and it was rare that patrons arrived or stayed without the master of Eberron's knowledge and approval. Milo stopped the elevator on the broad, balconied second floor, whose galleries overlooked the grand playing halls and gaming salons below. Sorin didn't wait for his watchman to show him to the balcony poised over the roulette room. He prowled there in irritation, across the hand-loomed Persian rugs and sleek, veined marble floors, to the edge of the balcony. Down below, standing among a small, glittering crowd gathered around the green table of the high-stakes wheel, was Corda Marakel. The tuxedoed, dark-haired incubus had just lost a bet on the wheel and was scowling as a pile of his chips were swept away by the croupier. By rough estimation, Marakel had just surrendered more than 10,000 euros to Eberron's bank. Sorin could hardly contain his smile. He didn't need the money, but the satisfaction of taking something from his old rival was its own reward. He stared as Corda snapped impatient fingers at one of the cocktail servers carrying a tray of filled champagne flutes. The demon grabbed one in each hand, and when he turned to offer one to the woman beside him, Sorin's gaze followed too. Damn. Milo was right when he said the Nephilim was something to see. Tall, long-limbed, with ample curves in all the right places. The platinum blonde stood beside Corda Marakel in form-hugging black pants and a matching long-sleeved top sliced far between her breasts in a generous V. Stiletto-heeled black leather boots rode up her calves and just over her knees. Her long, pale white hair was gathered off her face in a sleek ponytail that gleamed like gossamer silk under the casino's soft lights. Milo strode up to the balustrade next to Sorin and slanted him a knowing grin. "I don't suppose you've ever seen this Nephilim before either?"
"No,"
Sorin replied. And what a damned shame that was. Even from the floor above, he could see that she was beautiful, arrestingly so. Creamy skin, full pink lips, and a dark-lashed gaze that moved over her surroundings with an unmistakable confidence and intellect. Where the other Nephilim and females in the casino wore bright colors, sparkling gowns, and expensive jewels just screaming for notice, this woman in body-skimming black needed no embellishments to draw the eye of every man in the place. Sorin found himself studying her, fixating on her with an interest he could hardly deny. Desire flickered through his veins as he watched her bring the slender glass to her mouth. Lush lips parted over perfect white teeth as she took a brief drink. Watching her pretty mouth and throat work suddenly made everything male in Sorin, everything dangerously, carnally incubus, crackle with rapt, unswerving attention. Corda Marakel seemed equally entranced with his companion. Leering openly, he leaned in close and whispered something against her ear. She smiled, but the curve of those mesmerizing lips seemed too tight to be genuinely amused. Marakel didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't care. Crowding her body even more where they stood at the roulette table, he petted her silky platinum hair with a lover's caress. His fingers slid around to her cheek, and the grin he gave her was profane, purely sexual. Before Sorin could bite it back, a low, disapproving growl rumbled over his tongue. Marakel must have shocked the poor thing with whatever he suggested next, because she recoiled from him, teetering unsteadily on those sky-high heels. With her sudden, awkward wobble, the drink in her hand slipped through her fingers and crashed to the floor. Champagne exploded in all directions, splashing her and Marakel both. The incubus sputtered a string of curses as he tried to brush the spilled alcohol from his tux and white shirt. Sorin grinned.
"Couldn't have happened to a better man."
Champagne dripping off his chin, Marakel was furious. He bellowed for help from one of the nearby servers while his lovely companion cautiously backed away from the ruckus. She didn't seem clumsy at all as she withdrew from the table, and the look on her pretty face was nothing close to contrition. No, the slight tilt of her lips told a different story altogether.
"Shall I have them both removed from the premises, sir?"
Milo asked, chuckling from beside Sorin now.
"No, that won't be necessary."
His gaze locked onto the intriguing beauty. He watched as she slipped out of the roulette room to the main parlor of the casino.
"I'll handle this personally."
Chapter 2. Ashayla hurried out of the crowded gaming room, her sleeve and fingers soaked with spilled champagne. She wasn't embarrassed for what she'd done. She sure as hell wasn't sorry, especially considering she'd doused the demon on purpose. He had been dropping innuendos and suggestive comments all evening, despite the fact that she wasn't remotely tempted to take his bait. The lewd remarks and none too subtly roaming hands were annoying, but Ashayla deflected the incubus's advances without too much concern. She was a Nephilim, and she could handle herself well enough. She had no interest in playing games, his own or the ones taking place in the casino. Ashayla was focused on a bigger prize, and she wasn't going to let her unwanted but necessary date faze her. That is, until the sex demon suggested he might console himself over his losses at the roulette wheel by making her his thrall for the night. The thought sent a fresh spike of outrage through her. The bastard was lucky all she'd had in her hand at the time was a glass of champagne. The prospect of losing control of her body and mind under the influence of an incubus's sexual power was no laughing matter. Their kind was dangerously alluring without the benefit of the ability to bend any female's will to their own. Add in the hypnotic force of the thrall, and there wasn't a woman alive, full human or half-angel like her, who could resist them. Even the dark-haired demon who'd brought her to Ebarron's casino had a certain coarse sensuality that some females might find attractive. Ashayla wasn't one of them. She didn't know anything about him beyond his first name, Corda. Nor did she need to know anything more. They'd met only last night, after she'd arrived in Bucharest from the States. Ashayla had gone into the city and its after-hours nightclubs with the sole purpose of hiring an incubus to bring her to the exclusive casino. She'd learned the House of Ebarron's family business and residential stronghold was located somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains, but it wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd find in any tour guide. And to get there, she'd needed to find a demon to teleport her onto incubus soil along with him. Corda had seemed willing enough to take her there. He'd seemed almost too willing, as if the 500 euros he'd demanded in exchange for the favor, an amount twice as high as she'd budgeted, had been merely an afterthought. If she hadn't worked so hard and saved so long for this trip, this quest, to be more precise, it wouldn't have stung so much to watch her hired companion throw away her money at the tables along with a huge sum of his own. Then again, she didn't try to fool herself that her purpose for being in Ebarron's domain wasn't going to come at a steep price, nor without a great deal of risk. Stealing from an incubus house, particularly the formidable one she planned to cross tonight, was no easy feat. Not that the obstinate, arrogant master of Ebarron had given her any other choice. Ashayla pushed open the gold-trimmed mahogany door of the ladies' room on a huff of indignation. Ebarron's enormous wealth was evident on every silk-covered wall and framed original work of art. It shone in every inch of polished snow-white marble under her booted feet, and in every gleaming fob and fixture, right down to the restrooms of their lavish casino. The fortune the house had amassed over the centuries was obscene, so what would it hurt them to part with one insignificant item in their treasury? Greedy bastard, Ashayla muttered as she entered the restroom. Several elegantly dressed women stood at the mirrors primping, while others chatted quietly on tufted velvet chairs and divans in the restroom's lavish parlor. Most of them were human, with a few Nephilim here and there. All heads turned as Ashayla stormed in, reeking of spilled champagne and pulsing with combined disgust for her incubus companion and the one at the helm of Ebarron House. She didn't belong here. Nephilim or not, she was an outsider in this opulent place, and these women knew it. Could they see that in reality she was a 29-year-old struggling accountant from Chicago who'd just spent her last 500 euros merely for the chance to get in the door of this rarefied world? Could they detect her determination, or the sheer desperation in her plan for being there? Ashayla stared right back, defiant. These women and their disapproving, superior gazes didn't matter. Only one woman's opinion of her mattered, and that was Ashayla's grandmother. The aging Nephilim had been Ashayla's only family since her own mother had died when Ashayla was a child. Back home in Chicago, now it was Gran who was dying, after more than 100 years of living in the mortal realm. She probably had no more than mere weeks left, growing more frail and faded with each passing day. The thought put an ache in Ashayla's chest. It also renewed her resolve to see tonight's plan through, no matter what. In all their years together, Gran had never asked anything of her granddaughter. But a few months ago, as the old Nephilim recognized that her time was drawing thinner, she'd become fixated on an heirloom pendant that had fallen out of the family's hands nearly 2 decades ago. That Ashayla's mother had been the one to lose the pendant, sold it to a local pawn shop without Gran's knowledge, in fact, only made it harder to bear Gran's increasing worry over the piece. Gran wanted the pendant back. She talked of little else lately. She wanted to see it again, to hold it in her hands before she died, and know that it was returned to where it belonged. Against all odds, Ashayla had managed to track the semi-precious gemstone necklace from the pawn shop to a jewelry dealer across the country, who later sold it to an antique shop in Canada, who then sold it and a lot of other baubles and trinkets to a private collector. That private collector, she'd eventually discovered, was the House of Ebarron. Ashayla had thought her search was over. She sent a message through Nephilim channels to the Master of Ebarron, explaining the situation, but her request to buy the pendant back was denied. She sent another, better offer. Another refusal. She tried again and again over the past 5 months, but each time her request was denied. According to the responses from Sorin Ebarron, he was in the business of collecting items of value and interest, not trading them. As he'd so succinctly stated in his final written reply, a treasure won by the House of Ebarron was never surrendered. Ashayla probably shouldn't have sent her final message, but the arrogance and disregard of Eberron's master had pissed her off like nothing ever had in her life. How dare he refuse a dying woman's request? What kind of cold-hearted bastard was the Master of Ebarron? Really, he'd left her no alternative. Gran would have that pendant in her hands before she took her last breath, no matter what Ashayla had to risk to get it back. Nothing, and no one, was going to stop her. Determination stealing her, Ashayla strode to one of the polished marble and gold-fitted sinks to wash the alcohol off her hands and clothing. Her reflection gazed back at her, mouth grim with resolve, cobalt blue eyes unflinching. Not that she wasn't nervous, too. She was undertaking an enormous risk, plotting to steal from Eberron's famed treasury. But she hadn't come empty-handed. Hidden in one of her tall boots was a small vial of Nephilim magic. The black market potion had cost her nearly a full year's wages. All of her savings gone. She could always make more money. Gran's time, however, was limited. And Ashayla's mission to bring her some peace before she passed had run up against a very stubborn, uncompromising roadblock named Sorin of Ebarron. So she had traded her savings for a single dose of magic that promised to render her invisible, completely incorporeal, for 8 full minutes on demon soil. Not even the strongest incubus security spell could prevent her from entering Eberron's treasure room. Now all she had to do was slip away by herself to find it, swallow the elixir, and step inside the vault like a ghost. Then hope to hell she could find Gran's pendant and hightail it out of the casino without getting spotted by Eberron's watchmen or anyone else. All in under 8 minutes. The plan had seemed reasonable enough all the times she'd played it through in her mind. Risky as fuck, but doable. Now she felt a niggle of fear slide up her neck. If she failed to find the pendant? If she got caught? She didn't want to consider either of those scenarios. And the further she delayed in getting started, the worse the chances that her companion or someone else at the table was going to notice she'd been gone for too long. Steeling herself for what she had to do, Ashayla dried off and stepped out to the hall. Instead of heading back to the roulette room, she went the opposite direction, deeper into the sprawling corridors and sumptuous antechambers of the place. Research and rumors both speculated that the House of Ebarron kept their treasure secreted somewhere beneath the Grand Casino. Ashayla strolled nonchalantly, but with purpose, pausing to admire some of the priceless masterworks framed on the walls, while surreptitiously taking note of the dozens of dark-suited watchmen posted all over the casino. She drifted farther along a promenade of elegant arches and vaulted ceilings, bypassing a trio of pretty little Monet paintings with barely a blink of notice as she concentrated on the positions of Eberron's guards. They were everywhere. Big, muscular incubi whose shrewd eyes scanned the crowds like vigilant hawks. As she strolled deeper into the corridor, toward the casino's private salons, the challenge of what she was up against really began to sink in. Every ornate door and passageway seemed to have its own dedicated security detail. Damn it. There would be no slipping past any of Eberron's watchmen without their notice, which meant she'd have to use the dose of magic even before she located the treasure room, leaving less time to retrieve the pendant and make her
Are you lost?
The deep, unrushed voice halted her in her tracks. Shit. Speaking of watchmen keeping an eye over every corner. Ashayla forced a smile and slowly pivoted her head to look at the guard. I was just, Good Lord, he was gorgeous. Standing well over 6 feet tall, he was golden-haired, tawny-skinned, and had a breathtakingly handsome face that would have seemed more suited to an angel than a demon-spawned incubus. Ashayla's throat went suddenly dry. The rest of her started a slow, heated melt as she stared at him, her female body responding of its own volition to the sex demon's presence. Her pulse sped toward a gallop. Heat climbed up her throat, simultaneously spreading lower, over her breasts and down to the core of her body. She tried to ignore the carnal awareness that ran up her limbs and into her blood, but his allure was startlingly powerful, and she could tell that he wasn't even trying to affect her. If this was his sexual pull at rest, what would he be capable of with the added strength of his thrall? She damned well didn't want to find out. Like all incubi, his age was impossible to pinpoint. Outwardly, the watchman in his black suit and crisp white shirt appeared to be in his 30s. In truth, she knew he could be much, much older. When she seemed incapable of speaking, he folded his arms over his muscled chest, piercing her with a suspicious topaz-colored stare.
I asked you a question. What are you doing out here?
He spoke with an air of total authority, and that low rumble of a voice was made even more arresting by the hint of a Romanian accent, which rolled off his tongue like dark red wine. Ashayla summoned her composure enough to make up a feasible excuse. As anxious as she was to get away from him, she also didn't want to give him reason to think she had anything to hide. Nervously, she licked her lips. I was just admiring some of the art. She gestured to a moody post-impressionist painting in front of her, an obvious but rare Van Gogh. I've never seen such an impressive collection up close like this before. This painting, like all the others on the silk-covered walls in the palatial casino, was clearly an original, one that any museum would have kept protected from the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?